Good evening and welcome to a special edition of the Kaufman Corner. As there's nobody that I would like to be spending these holidays with, be spending Christmas night with, than Rany Jazayerli. However, we're not doing it. It may appear as though we are, but even we have souls, and I have a wife who wouldn't let it happen. So we got together a little bit early to put together a very special edition of the Kaufman Corner for the next 2 weeks, because we've got holidays next week as well. We are bringing you the absolute very best, the definitive, at least with one of us, the definitive all-time team of the Kansas City Royals. Both Rany and I put together our all-time lineups. We'll cover that tonight. And then we've also put together our all-time pitching staffs. That's what we're going to do this week and next here on the Kaufman Corner.
This is the Kaufman Corner Podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kaufman Corner is hosted by Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kaufman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
How about that? We're officially big time. We have a big time, vocal guy now. It's our buddy Kurt Siebel, but he actually is. He does it in addition to working with me. Is a vocal guy. His voice on radio stations around the country, as well as ads and everything. So, I think touch of class there, Rany. What do you think of the new Open all completed?
We're moving on up, Soren.
Yes.
Yeah. Pretty soon we're going national.
All right. Technically, we're global. I mean, do you want to hear the list of
universal
where we're downloaded? Yes, we'll go universal. We're downloaded across the globe. All right. This was something we talked about doing that we wanted to do at some point during the off season. I'll put together our all-time team, and with the way our usual night, if you're catching us via the podcast, we do stream live on Sundays at 10 p.m. Central. The way it fell, Christmas is tonight, at least as everybody is watching it. It's not for you and I, but happy holidays to you, Rany. I hope
happy holidays to you, Soren. Yeah. Merry Christmas.
Enjoying the holiday season here. Thank you very much. And because, like we said, we have families, we have lives, we have obligations. We're not actually here tonight. In a way, I am. I got to launch it, so I was here at some point. But we wanted to put together our all-time team. I love this exercise. I'm going to have you explain what kind of our parameters were, because you can do it different ways. But I thought it was great, and it was hard. It was harder than I thought it was going to be. It took more time than I thought it was going to take. But it really was a great learning lesson in the art of building a team, right? And of putting some effort into what it would take to win over the parameters that we set up. And what were the parameters for how we put this team together?
So the basic parameters are this: you're putting together a team for the fate of the universe that's going to play 162 games. So you need depth, you need protection against potential injuries. It's a 26-man roster, right? And you could divvy that up as you feel fit. I think we're probably both inclined to a 15-11 split here. I'm kind of old school. I don't feel like you need 9 relievers in your bullpen, particularly since you're talking about having the all-time best starting pitchers. Presumably,
my guys ate some innings. I don't know about yours, but I started to handle some innings.
Yeah, we don't have a bunch of guys who are going to throw 162 innings maybe in a full season on the mound. We got a couple guys on the team that might have done that by the All-Star break in their career. So it's a 26-man roster. And the way I propose that we think about this is because anytime you put together, an all-time best list when it comes to any sport, not just baseball, are you talking about peak value or career value? You're talking about the player at their absolute best or the player over the course of their career. And I've always felt like for an exercise like this, I like to use 7 years as sort of a benchmark. You can take the 7 best years of a player's career, and he will perform at the average level he was over those 7 years. And it's important to note that we're only counting what they did as a member of the Kansas City Royals.
Right.
So obviously, the guy was partial, a couple of years and then went on to have a great career somewhere else. You can only count what he did with the Royals. If he played 7 years or more, then he's basically a full-time guy. If you pick a guy who maybe was only a Royal for 4 or 5 years, he can still be on the team. He can still start most of the time. But like, this is common sense. We're not putting this through a simulator, but common sense dictates. Neither one of us. I'm assuming you didn't pick Jay Bell as your starting shortstop. Jay Bell's all-time great season in Kansas City. He was a member of the team for 1 year. Now that is a different thought experiment. Who the all-time best individual seasons in Royals history? Maybe we'll do that one next year. Well, we're gonna have need some holiday content next year.
Sure.
I think we might do that next year. But
after
for
the
now,
World Series, after the Royals have won the World Series,
of course, after we've gotten the confetti out of our hair from the ticker tape parade, the confetti is about as real as my hair.
But also we can talk about the new stadium, because the vote will have taken place in maybe have taken place in August, as that news was out several weeks ago. So something to think about as well.
Absolutely. So we'll save that one for next year. But for this is more of a career value arc. But I feel like 7 years is a good fit. And yeah, it's 22. You want to have left-right balance in your lineup. You want to have bench players who actually do things for your team. And of course, you can use players however you want. So if we decided not to simply pick great Royals bench players. You take great Royals players and put them on the bench. I mean, John Wathan was a great bench player, backup catcher. Bill Pecota was a great bench player, but there are guys who would have been elite bench players if they were forced to be on the bench, because they were everyday players in the major leagues for many years. So, but you have to actually construct a roster, construct a lineup, and construct a bullpen, and let's see what we've got.
All right. So how do we want to reveal? I do want to add one thing, because as you were talking, so when I was we were discussing this, and I was asking you, okay, well, how do you want to do it? And you mentioned, hey, if you have Jay Bell, he's only going to play like 20 games, right? Because he wasn't there. It's kind of just a rule of thumb. We didn't have a hard and fast every year counts as this or whatever. But so with that in mind, one of the things I did was I went ahead and took a 5-year guy.
Okay.
Right? And I said, okay, I'm going to take him, but I'm going to make sure that my lineup has room for him, because I'm going to assume he was kind of like hurt a little bit, right?
Exactly.
Just that. So I've got a line. My overall roster can play without him, no problem.
Exactly. You just got to have some bench, some depth, and guys who could maybe play multiple positions, etc.
Okay. So how do you want to reveal? Did you do a batting order, by the way?
I do. I have one against. I have a batting order against right-handed pitching. Let's put it that way, because I got some platoons. But if let's do a lineup at the very end once we've revealed the whole roster.
Okay. And what do you want to start with? Do you want to start with surprises? Do you want to just roll with your starting 9? And then
I think position by position. I think we should go. Let's do catcher first and kind of move around the field.
Okay. You want me to do the honors?
Why don't you? We'll alternate. You go first with the catcher, and we'll move around from there.
So and so if I have a backup, which obviously I do, both of them, right? You want me
to certainly for catcher, yes. I would say the other positions maybe hold it till the end.
So I thought this was one of the easiest ones, and I think it's why you're letting me lead off, because it's a no-brainer. It's a layup. And so I have Salvador Perez and Darryl Porter. I do too. I think it's pretty easy. Darryl Porter, I think for youngsters, go take a look at Darryl Porter's numbers. I mean, he would have been even more heralded today. He was certainly a very highly thought of catcher. There's a reason why Whitey Herzog immediately went and got him when he went to the Cardinals. Could really get on base for the position. Left-handed hitting catcher that could also defend. That's the easy one. I think, if you're catching us now, you're certainly aware of what Salvador Perez is. But I think you get great offense. You get gold gloves all over the place. I know about the framing of Salvador Perez. I still think his defense is a little better than maybe the metrics give it to him. But that combination is outstanding. And I thought this was the easiest position to figure out.
It was definitely easy because, like you said, when you need two guys at the same position, these guys, it's not just that they're clearly the two best catchers in Royals history, but that they really complement each other incredibly well. I'm trying to find between the million tabs that I have open here.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure you're in the same boat.
Uh-huh.
The downside of Darryl Porter, the one downside is he only spent 4 years as a Kansas City Royal. So when we talk about how much he can play,
That's why I put Salvi. By the way, that's why I put Salvi as the starter.
Okay.
Because you can make a case. You make a case for Darryl Porter being the starter, but I was like, okay, well, Porter doesn't fit the six years, so it's a little bit easier to slide him in as the number 2 guy.
Fair enough. I typically will build a lineup for right-handed pitching first when I play in fantasy or Stratomatic or something, and then adjust from there. So to me, Darryl Porter would be basically the full-time starter against righties. Like, I'd see this is almost a 50-50 split. Maybe Porter gets 90 games in and Salvi gets 70. But Darryl Porter was a left-handed. That's another unique thing about him. He was a left-handed hitting catcher. Only 4 years at Kansas City, but 4 really, really good years.
Right.
I think in 4 years he amassed almost 17 WAR, which is almost top 20 all time in Royals history for hitters, and in only 4 seasons. And I really want to point out his 1979 season, which I don't think gets enough attention because between 1976 and 1980, 1979 is the only year the Royals didn't make the playoffs. But it wasn't the offense. That was the year the pitching collapsed. The offense was elite that year. And Darryl Porter in 1979, first off, he led the league in walks. I don't know what's more unusual, that a catcher led the league in walks or that a Royal led the league in walks, but he was both. And he walked 121 times, he had 20 homers, 10 triples at a 421 OBP. I'm gonna throw a number out at you. In the last 50 years of American League Baseball, who had the most wins above replacement, using Baseball Reference, of any catcher, American League catcher, in the last 50 years?
In a single?
In a single season. The best. What is the best catcher season in the American League in the last, let's even say since 1969, since in the expansion era?
Maybe that Darryl Porter season where he was top 5 in MVP.
He was second. Joe Mauer, the year he won the MVP.
Okay.
And hit 365, led the league in batting average, on base, and slugging as a catcher. Joe Mauer was an absolute monster before concussions forced him to move to first base. That's the highest WAR of any American League catcher at 7.8. Darryl Porter was at 7.6. Just a hair's width away from that. Third, I think, was Carlton Fisk, his Rookie of the Year season. And then you got Thurman Munson in 1973, and then another Carlton Fisk season in 1977. The only 5 catchers to have a 7 WAR season in the American League. Darryl Porter doesn't get enough credit. That one season is one of the all-time great seasons in Royals history.
Sure.
At any position. So he's tremendous. He was a good defensive catcher. We don't have framing metrics from the 70s, but I have no reason to believe he was bad at it. But left-handed hitter, high OBP guy, is the perfect foil for Salvador Perez, the right-handed hitter with, already second, I think, all time in Royals history in home runs, but a low OBP guy. That same season, Darryl Porter threw out 47% of guys trying to steal in 1979. So, I mean, it was just a phenomenal season.
Yeah.
But there are terrific combinations. They work extremely well together.
Just for people to understand, the on-base percentage for Darryl Porter, his 4 years in Kansas City, 353, 358, 421. We had 121 walks the season you're talking about, and 354. I mean, that you get that from behind the dish. And the guy was, an all-star and a good defender. That's as good as it gets. And so I think the catching is absolutely rock solid on this team. And you've got a great platoon. Like you said, we go into it for the season, and you get into a postseason, you play a 7-game series, whoever you want to fire, you're ready to go behind the dish.
You can mix and match with whatever you're going up against.
Exactly. All right. Next position, your honor, where we're gonna come out.
Well, we'll go around the diamond. We'll go to first base. And this one, it's actually a tougher selection than I thought, but this is the other position that I'm going to platoon at.
Okay.
I have 2 positions where I'm platooning. So against righties, getting the bulk of the playing time, it's going to be John Mayberry.
Okay.
And then the other half of that, who's going to be on the bench and be a tremendous bench bat, is Mike Sweeney, who actually had slightly more wins above replacement in his Royals career than Mayberry. But I feel like the left-handed bat fits the lineup a little bit better, but they're platooning. Mayberry's a guy I think who his performance is also kind of lost because he had his best years right before the Royals started going to the playoffs. And was traded away after the 77 season while they were still in that playoff run. But from 1972 to 1975, I mean, there's not much difference between what John Mayberry was then and like a Yordan Alvarez is now for the Astros. I mean, he was that elite a hitter. Guy hit, I don't know, 280 to 300, a ton of walks. This is the one decade where the Royals actually valued plate discipline, and they had guys like Porter and Mayberry. And I believe Mayberry also led the league in walks at least one time. Twice actually, in 1973 and 1975. He led the league in OBP in 1973 at 417. He had a 416 OBP in 1975. Led the league in OPS plus in 1975. Like, I don't think any Royal has done that since George Brett. So just an absolute elite hitter. Defense was not necessarily anything to write home about, but that, he's the first baseman. It really didn't matter. He could absolutely mash. And being left-handed, he fits this lineup as well. Mike Sweeney, I think most people are familiar with what he did. The advantage of having Mike Sweeney is also Mike Sweeney serves as my team's third catcher. Okay. In an emergency, because I think that's important. I mean, I'm the kind of guy, and at least certainly in a Stratomatic setting, I am moving players in and out of the game feverishly. Like, I'm definitely a type of, Earl Weaver type manager where I'm trying to use everybody on the roster. And you give me a 26-man roster instead of a 25-man roster, I'm going to be even more aggressive. So there may be a situation where I need a pinch run for a catcher in a tie game or to score the tying run. And it goes extra innings. Well, Mike Sweeney knows how to use the tools of ignorance. He wasn't great at it, but he played in played in the major leagues as a catcher for a couple of years before he really broke out as a hitter. So
that's why I have Mitch Meyer on my team.
Who?
Mitch Meyer.
Oh, Mitch Meyer.
No.
Good for you, Soren. Good for you.
I will say at first base I have the same guys, but I'll give a peek under the covers. We're going to have a DH, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would usually have both Mayberry and Sweeney in there.
Okay.
Right? Because I want Sweeney's bat. But I did too think about the fact that that gives me a guy that I've got my emergency third catcher that can make that happen. So I've got Mayberry and Sweeney. Everything you just said, I'm in total agreement with. John Mayberry is also now, because so many years have gone by, it's forgotten what kind of force he was. That it's really thought of as just George Brett and Frank White. They're on the team, but John Mayberry, Darryl Porter. We're talking about why that 1980 team was one that really, and in the 70s one, if they didn't just.
I was going to say, I think the 77 team was even better than the 80 team. People don't remember that because they lost in the playoffs, but that's the team that still had that had Porter and had Mayberry and so much other talent there. Yes,
that was the team that was probably the best team in the history of this franchise. And so yes, Mayberry and Sweeney, I'm in total agreement. All right, so we go over to second base.
I mean, it's a cliche, but it's this. You go ahead. I guess you go first.
Yeah, I like how you're giving me all the no-brainers.
Just going around.
Randy needs his mic time. Frank White, for all the obvious reasons, is my second baseman. Now I'll get into kind of the backup situation a little bit later on when we get to the bench. I think the bench is really fun.
We'll get to that. This is the no-brainer.
Yeah, so I've got Frank White at second base, batting probably 8th in my lineup too, by the way.
I have him in the same spot, and the reason for that, we'll get to that right very soon here. So we'll move to shortstop, and I'll make the point in this one's, I think, kind of a no-brainer too, really in a different way, and that's Fred Patek.
Yes.
And this is an area where the Royals could have a little bit of a weakness. I mean, just offensively, batting, in an all-time lineup, having your 8 and 9 batters be Frank White and Fred Patek. Frank White's career on base percentage was 293.
Yeah.
Patek's was, as a Royal, at least, was a little bit higher at 309, but had like no power, or as White developed power. If we're taking the best 7 years, you could actually give Frank White some credit because he really developed as a hitter. You could eliminate his 20s, and in his 30s, he was still a very good defender, but had developed pop. And, let's not forget, Frank White was an absolutely terrific defensive second baseman. And the metrics back that up.
Yes.
I mean, he was, I don't know, I don't have the exact numbers, but something like 100 runs above average for his career. He was a very, very, very good defender who deserved most, if not all, of his 8 Gold Gloves. So, I mean, that's a huge, thing. This team, I want this team to be absolutely elite defensively. And that starts up the middle.
And I would say also the other thing about Frank is as we view him in his era, if Frank were the player he was then today, the defense would still be elite, but his home run uh, pop, which when he was got into his 30s and he was hitting 17, 22, 22, 17, that today is 30. It's 28. 34. It's just what he was in that era. Bigger ballparks, much more foul territory. Let's keep that in mind. He was playing in all these all these football, baseball combo stadiums, so more foul territory. So that's what makes John Mayberry and Darrell Porter's on base percentage even better than you realize, because every foul ball didn't go into the seats like they do now in these tiny little ballparks. And so when you see the ones that are a little bit rougher, remember that there were a lot of fly balls that were caught that today's ballparks wouldn't allow to be caught. So I think Frank and Freddie, I'm with you. I looked at that and I'm like, really? And that's where you want to go find Jay Bell. You want to go find that.
Well, I would say, especially at shortstop, Freddie, it's Patek by default, unfortunately. I mean, by wins above replacement, I think the second best shortstop in Royals history is Alcides Escobar. I mean, I really hope if we do this in 5 or 6 years, it's going to be Bobby Witt by a landslide. Like, it would be really nice to have an upgrade on the all-time Royals team. That's by far the easiest place for that to occur. Yeah. But I don't want to short shrift Patek. I mean, he was an okay hitter, but was an elite defender. An elite base runner. Led the league in steals once, and a very good defender. And also, when you look at his offensive numbers, you really do have to take into account the context. You mentioned the ballpark issue. Like, the bottom line is in the 70s, especially the early 70s, and he was the starting shortstop from 1970, I believe. Offensive levels in the American League, I mean, the first couple of years were so bad that they literally invented the designated hitter because his offense was so bad. And I want to say in his first season as a Royal, he hit 1971, excuse me, he hit 267, 323, 371. He was a league average hitter with those numbers. Like, that doesn't look like league average. And while he never hit for power, he could get on base at a decent clip for that era. So he's kind of sort of the perfect number 9 hitter, the second leadoff hitter, decent OBP and no power, but if he does get on base, he has the speed to turn over the top of the lineup and score when George Brett hits a double.
That's right. When he's on base, he's a threat. And I think that's the thing that you like. And so I agree. And he doesn't clog the bases in front of you when you turn the lineup over if you've got speed up at the top of the lineup. So, yeah, I had Freddie at short as well. And I thought it was pretty easy. And I knew right where I was going to put him. In fact, I figured that out early, and I put him down at 9 in my batting order. I'm like, okay, this is where it's going. I also knew Frank was going to be there. So I'm like, okay, here's my 8, 9, which I didn't like. I'm like, okay, I'm righty down here at the bottom. I wouldn't mind getting to change it up. And then I'll be interested in if our teams end up being, I don't think they're going to be the same. I think we're going to be different on 1, if my prediction is correct, maybe 2, on how it works out or how we would deploy them. But I'll be interested to hear how you would handle the lineup. So
yeah, it's interesting. I definitely think our thought process is the same, because I kind of built the lineup from the bottom first because that was the easy part. Like, I knew who my 8 and 9 hitters were, and yes, the right thing was like, okay, well, I don't want to have too many right-handers in a row. The other thing I do want to point out, though, is the weakness of the Royals lineup is having White and Patek 8, 9, which to me, if I'm building a real team for a real season, I need to be aggressive about having guys on my bench who can hit for those guys, to pinch hit for those guys. I'm not Ned Yost here. I'm not letting Alcides Escobar bat in the 9th inning to get, experience for the future. I'm trying to win now. So I'm going to have a bunch of pinch hitters, and that means I need to have guys who come in and play, in a pinch, shortstop or second base, late in the game, if the starter's been pinch hit for. So that dictated the contours of my bench as well.
Yeah, when we get to the bench like that, I think we can talk about, hey, this is why this guy was thinking about this guy, but I went here because of it. All right, so that again takes me back. I love how you didn't go to third. You went to short for your slot because it was the more interesting position, and you again give the duh to me. And
I don't know. There's a good debate to be had here, Soren. I don't know who you're picking at third base.
I had George Brett. I had George Brett, and there was no one else you could possibly.
That's a pretty easy one. And I have the biggest change I would have with him is I have him batting second in my lineup, because that's where you put your best hitter.
I do too. I do too.
That's the biggest change in the game. You want that guy getting as many at bats as possible. So yes, I had White and Patek 8-9, and I had Brett 2, and then it's like, okay, I put everybody else in around those guys and
Yep,
figured
yep,
out what
that's
they
it. Again, we always think, oh yeah, Randy's not gonna. And then I'm like, oh no, Randy's looking at the same thing I am. He's gonna do the same thing I did. I did that as well with Brett. All right, so next.
Okay, you decide since apparently I'm picking.
No, go ahead. No, I like
I
how
don't
it's.
know where I'm going. Okay,
Don't
so
break
I'm gonna
precedent.
go to left. I'm gonna go to left
What's
field.
7? What is 7? Even though you went 6
Yeah,
and then 5.
yeah, I
What's
did. I'm just thinking geographically.
okay?
All right, so we'll go to 7 now. We'll go to left field.
Yep.
And so the outfield, like I wonder if we're gonna have the same guys, but in completely different roles. So because this was a really tough decision. It's not that we don't know who the best outfielders in Royals history are. It's just a matter of how do I fit them on a team. And so ultimately, I actually wonder if we should discuss center first because I almost feel like center field will
I'm happy.
dictate the
Yeah.
rest. Are you okay? Let's actually do that because it's explaining left without won't make sense until you know who's in center.
Okay.
And so ultimately, for center field, the way I felt this team fit together best was I put Carlos Beltran in center.
You're such an ass. So did I. Yeah.
I
And
mean,
listen, I attacked it. We might not even have one difference now because I thought this.
I certainly have one that's unconventional, but we'll see what you say.
Oh, no, we have the same.
Oh boy.
Thing.
Okay. Well then,
I'm sure we're going to land at the same thing.
then this might be the most boring discussion podcast ever, but that's okay.
If I'm wrong, I'll well, when we get there, I'll say if this isn't it, then you've got this because I know what it is.
Okay.
But yeah, I put Carlos Beltran in center, and I did it for a couple of reasons. One, I think the defensive metrics are more wonky than the offensive metrics. They're a little bit harder. It's kind of like coverage in football. Was he actually covering him or not? What was the assignment supposed to be in center field? Does somebody else get a whole bunch of balls that, if you had a decent left or right fielder, they would have gotten there. And so you get credit for all this range when you're really going out into kind of it was a run, but it wasn't that hard, but you catch more of them because your left fielder can't run at all. And so you get more credit. It's a little bit more wonky. I'm going to tell you, as I watched center field, nobody, I think Brian McRae is underrated as a defensive center fielder.
I was going to say Brian McRae actually is one of the few guys I would put at that absolute top tier for a brief period of time. He had like a 2-year stretch where he was as good as anybody I've ever seen.
Yeah, defensively, he was just absolutely outstanding out there. Range back on the ball, not can handle the wall, but nobody ever handled the wall like Carlos Beltran. It was not a problem. There was no running into the wall. Did he get hurt? No, he gracefully climbed the wall and caught the ball. And I think that's one of the things because you talk about Lorenzo Cain in center field. I wasn't old enough to really watch Amos Otis and really know how well. I've seen film and I know what people tell me. So if somebody wanted to attack me and say I'm a jackass and Amos Otis was definitively better, I'm not armed with the ammunition to fight that off. But I will tell you that nobody, with the exception of maybe Brian McRae, but Beltran did it for longer. He was the mark of a guy that is getting everywhere is when people are like, well, he doesn't try that hard. No. He runs exactly how fast it takes to go to exactly where the ball is going. And I think the fact that he didn't have to, you see these guys like, oh, look, they're pumping. And all of a sudden it's a banana route that they didn't take the right line to it. Carlos Beltran would take a straight line to every ball. I don't ever remember really a guy, the ball playing him. He was tremendous at the wall. I think he was the best center fielder that this franchise has ever had. The offense is outstanding. And I think if you want to steal a base, he's got to be on the team because if you had to steal a base late, he's the greatest. I think when he was young is the greatest base stealer the game has ever seen. He was never out.
That's fascinating because I don't even think he's the greatest base stealer in the Royals all-time outfield. So we'll get to that.
By quantity, but I'm telling you, Carlos Beltran took them when they mattered, and he never got caught.
He definitely, his stolen base percentage is one of the greatest of all time.
Isn't that what you analytics nerds, berate the stolen base for? Is because you
100%, 100%.
And when I'll never forget the opening day game. Or no, it was an opening day game. It was a late makeup game against the Diamondbacks. Rany Johnson pitching, completely blanking the Royals down 1-0. He either drew a walk or got hit by pitch, stole second, stole third, and scored on a sacrifice fly. The Royals won 1-0. And it was all Carlos Beltran working the plate, getting on base, and taking bases when they knew he wanted to go, knew he had to go because they weren't going to hit him in, and still got it anyway. He was the best. He was the best.
He was the best of his era. Was he the best of all time?
Sure.
Yes. We'll get to that. But for everything you basically said is what I agree. I mean, I had several different permutations. I didn't originally have him starting, and then I realized, you know what, he's the one guy on this team whose defense and center I feel most comfortable with. The Royals have several other elite center fielders, but defensively, I felt like they might fit better at other positions. Whereas I think Beltran's defense, I had the least concerns about. And in terms of performance, he clearly deserves to start. The issue here would be a little like Darryl Porter, that he basically played equivalent about 5 seasons.
5.5
with the Royals. Yeah. But one of those was injured. I'm counting one of his sophomore season. He was injured for half the year, but he basically played 5.5 seasons. He's not going to be. That's
like plenty of guys who can play center.
Exactly. That's what. But I don't worry about that because we have plenty of guys who can fit it. That's fill in for him. Okay. So
but can I just point out? I mean, you know, in 2004, and I know only part of the year was with the Royals, but he scored 121 runs. Right, like the 70 more when he got down to the Astros, which just speaks to the fact that, you know, and his numbers, frankly, got a little more power, but a little less average. Same on base, and it just shows. I mean, you know, the 51 runs he scored in 69 games for the Royals. You know, if he had been in a lineup, I think he's underappreciated for what he did. I mean, we're talking about OPSs once he gets going at age 24, 876, 847, 911, 915, and we're talking about the premium defensive center fielder. The longer I looked at it, I wanted it to be Carlos Beltran, full disclosure. But I'm like, I actually went into it like when I coach my kid, I can't give her all the compliments because she's the coach's kid. And, you know, unfortunately, Carlos Beltran, everyone knows I love Carlos Beltran. So I'm not going to put him on the team, but it's indisputable. He absolutely belongs there.
Well, the one other thing, which is a little bit cheating in that said we can't consider what they did outside of a Royals uniform, but it's not his fault that he never got to play in the postseason as a member of the Royals. But when he did get to play in the postseason, he has one of the most impressive postseason performance of all time. I mean, he 65 playoff games in his career, hit 307, 412, 609. He's an over 1,000 OPS. I mean, until late in his career, like he played a lot of those games after he was 38 years old. His last 3 postseasons. Before that, I believe his OPS was postseason OPS was basically in the top 3 all time, next to Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. And specifically, you mentioned that his final season in Kansas City was 69 games, I think you said. Well, the only reason it was 69 games was because the Royals traded him because they were terrible and were about to lose him in free agency. That year, he goes to the Astros. The Astros go to the playoffs, and he has one of the all-time great playoff runs in the history of baseball. 12 games, 8 home runs. He had a 1591 OPS in the NLDS, a 1521 OPS in the the NLCS, which they lost in 7 games to the Cardinals, one of the all-time great NLCS seasons. Oh, also in 12 games, 8 home runs, 6 stolen bases in 6 attempts.
Yeah.
So presumably, if he had gotten to the postseason as a young member of the Royals, that was his first postseason, just 4 months after leaving the organization, and just went nuts. So this is a guy I'm pretty comfortable with. If this team we put together is going to the playoffs, he's going to be a force.
OPS plus in that prime stretch, 123, 114, 132, 133. All right, enough.
Very, very good, and with everything else that you throw in, the speed, the defense, he's excellent.
Not grounding into double plays. I mean, could do it all, and it could play where obviously proved. And if you're a great center fielder, you can play anywhere else. If we want to put somebody else out there, he can go wherever you need him to play. All right. So we started with center field there. Now, where do you want to go?
Let's go to left field.
Okay.
You want to go first?
Sure. I'll go first. Okay. Willie Wilson is in left field.
Okay. Well, we agree. We're on this. Go ahead and explain why, and I'll give
you for number one, he did play left field with Amos Otis in center, and then later, as he got older, played left field with Bo Jackson in center. So this isn't like we're just making something up to make it fit. Not running George Brett out to the outfield because he was an athletic guy that stole 200 bases to make it all fit, right? I mean, he played left field. I do love that he can play center. I can move him over and he can play center field. At the peak, he wasn't a big walk guy, but his batting average was so good that he could get on base. This is the guy I'm assuming you're saying is the best base stealer, correct?
Yeah, I mean, Bill James once wrote of Willie Wilson, that young Willie Wilson, because again, if we're taking a 7-year stretch, Willie, I think, is one of those guys who definitely benefits from. You don't want to penalize a guy because he stuck around forever. I mean, Willie Wilson played with the Royals for, I don't know, 14 seasons or something like that, and by the end, from basically after they won the World Series, he was not the player he used to be, and that's okay because he was into his 30s. But young Willie Wilson, Bill James once wrote, was basically the fastest real baseball player in Major League history. Like, not counting like the Herb Washington pinch runner types, guy who actually played every day. And he makes a very strong statistical case for it. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me here, but if you look at all-time history of baseball, Major League leaders in inside the park home runs, it's like Willie Wilson here. I think it's like 21 inside the park home runs in his career or something. I think the next guy's like 11. At least in the live ball era. I mean, I'm not going to count 1886 when they didn't actually have outfield fences and the ball just rolled until it hit a cow in a pasture or something. But in modern Major League history, Willie Wilson, more inside the park home runs than anybody. His first season as an everyday guy, stole 83 bases and only got caught 12 times. Next year, 79 stolen bases and got caught 10 times. You talk about Carlos Beltran. Incredible base stealing percentage, 86% for his career. Well,
Willie's 74.
No, Willie is 83.
74 for his career, or are you talking about his career with the Royals?
For his career for the Royals, I have him at 83.7. For his total career, it's like 83.4.
I have him as 668 of. Oh, hang on. I added something in. You're right. I added an extra.
You're putting your thumb on the scales here against Willie.
I did. 83%. Yeah.
And if you just look at the 7 years from 1979 to 1985, his best 7 years, he was at 85.5%, just 1% below Beltran, but he was stealing almost twice as many bases per year. And then you just look at the triples. He had 15 triples in a season 4 times, including 21 in 1985, which was the most in, I think, the majors between like World War II and when Curtis Granderson had 23 triples, I think, in 2007 or 2006. So, I mean, Willie Wilson had speed, and he used that speed on the field. But the other reason I love him here is his defensive metrics. In left field, you mentioned he was, played left field for, I think, 4 or 5 seasons before Amos Otis retired. Right, Amos Otis claimed center field, and his defensive metrics in left field are phenomenal. From 1979 to 1982, he was plus 25 runs, plus 24 runs, plus 20 runs, plus 23 runs. I mean, Alex Gordon's the best left fielder I ever saw, but even Gordon's numbers were not quite at that level for that long.
Is this the move that you thought was crafty?
No.
Okay, good.
We'll get to that.
Because I thought you would have this as well.
Okay.
And by the way, based on that prime, I also have him batting leadoff.
I don't, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But what's interesting is that he moved to center field basically in 1983, and his defensive numbers in center are pretty average. And some of that, maybe he's getting older at the same time he's taking on more responsibility, but I just feel like he was underrated as a left fielder. Yeah, you want more offense from left field, but he covered so much ground in left field that, even with the offensive requirements out there, he was just such a stud. And you put him and Beltran next to each other defensively.
Yes.
We saw what an elite defensive outfield could do in real life with the 2014-2015 Royals. That was fun.
Yeah,
that was fun. And this would be a very fun team to watch. So, yes. So I have Willie Wilson in left field.
Okay. And so does that bring you up for right or me?
Yes, I'm up now. So right field, I'm doing something a little unconventional. I'm playing a guy out of position.
But you're not. Let me just see if we're on the same way. You're not, because he did play this position sometimes to give him a little more, rest on legs that had been criticized for being often injured.
Then we might be thinking about a different guy, because I don't think my guy played right field at all.
Okay.
I have Amos Otis out there.
Okay. I do not.
Okay. So I cannot in good conscience have a lineup, an all-time Royals lineup that doesn't have Amos Otis in it. After George Brett, he has the most wins above replacement in Royals history. Um, and the problem I had with him is that his defensive numbers in center field are okay. They're not great, and
Right.
he did win 3 Gold Gloves. On the one hand, defensive metrics from the 70s may not be great. On the other hand, if you've ever looked at Gold Glove voting from the 70s and 80s, that wasn't very good either. So, um, I just had more confidence in Beltran being a great defender out there. And Amos Otis, maybe he was great in center, maybe he was average, but I have no doubt he'd be elite defensively in right field. And he has the arm for it. Man, I didn't, looking at his assist numbers playing center field. I mean, 1970s first year he had 16 assists. He had 10 the next year. He as late as 1979 he had double-digit assists in center field. So I think he clearly has the arm to play right. And now you've got an outfield that just doesn't let anything drop. This is, the fastest, best defensive outfield in Major League history if it actually came to pass. So I got Amos Otis out there. I have a feeling I know who you'd have out there, but
Okay. Well, based
I'll
on I pretty much let the cat out of the bag with how I described it, right? Who do I have out there?
Lorenzo Cain.
I have Lorenzo Cain out there.
Yeah.
And the reason I have Lorenzo Cain is because he actually did play right field. Right. So I respect what you're doing, but I thought about doing that as well and saying, all right, I'm going to get the 3 center fielders out there. And I thought about it, but I thought, okay, we're playing for the universe here. We let's not learn on the fly, right? So I have no problem with it, and I again, but I wanted to get a guy who actually played right field. So I looked at Jermaine Dye, I looked at Danny Tarble and said, okay, can I put together a platoon where I have Danny Tarble playing 30, 40? How about Bo Jackson? Went through it all. But Lorenzo Cain was tremendous in right field. And, I think this gives me 3 center fielders out there, and it gives me the way they could play. So I'm very happy to have Lorenzo Cain in right field.
I totally understand where you come from. It was something that was the hardest decision, I think, ultimately, was what do I do with this position where,
Because they don't have your traditional Dewey Evans or
right. They don't have an all-time great right fielder, but they have multiple all-time great center fielders. And it's that the struggle is, how do I put together a team where I can take advantage of that center field talent? And like I said, Cain has done it. I looked at Cain, and he was a great player for 4 or 5 years. And I look at Otis was a great player for a decade, and that difference I just could not ignore.
Well, and I've got a little bit the full disclosure. I'll talk about with my bench how I work it and how I justify Cain being out there when he doesn't get to the 6-7 year mark, and why I think it still works with him front and center. And maybe he would be on the bench when you talked about how you set your lineups. Maybe he would be on the bench and the other guy would start potentially. But I wanted to stick to some position, at least across the starters, guys who played. So, but I have no problem with how you did it. So then that takes us to DH.
To DH, yeah. So,
okay, where'd you go?
So I know you, sounds like you may have done differently. I ultimately could not just ignore the obvious answer, and I got Al McRae there.
Okay.
And I mean, like, do you have Mike Sweeney there?
I have Mike Sweeney at the DH, right?
Okay. And what the thing that stuck out to me is Al McRae, for a 10-year stretch from 1974 to 1983, had a 130 OPS plus. That's, all-star, borderline MVP material if you're a good defender. Obviously, he had not as much value because he didn't play defense, but 130 for a decade is just phenomenal. Mike Sweeney, for his best 7-year stretch from 1999 to 2005, had the same 130 OPS plus. So Al McRae and Mike Sweeney were basically comparable as hitters, except McRae did it for several years longer. I have Sweeney on the team. He plays against lefties at first base, but I ultimately decided I'm going to stick with McRae there. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of an obvious move, but it just made the most sense to me.
The not as much power for Hal. Maybe had we seen him in this era, maybe it's a little bit different. But I love Hal. 54 doubles, 46 doubles, twice leading the league. I love that there's black ink splashed around on his page. Right, two doubles championships, an RBI championship. He drove in 133 one time, a 351 on base. Yeah, there's no way he cannot make the team. Peek under the covers for what's coming for my team. But I just one, I think Sweeney was I think he was a force. And I think also the rest of the offense around the league rose up. So if he's posting a 133, as you mentioned, Hal was down at a time that there was an offense. And so you're that far up in an era where they had put more into the offense and the offense had gotten better. You're better. I think Mike Sweeney was a better pure hitter. Hal McRae, based on his era, may have been a better pure player, from where it was. He wasn't asked to go play a position he wasn't really very good at and still do it. Which I always appreciate that Mike Sweeney did. But yeah, I would have no problem switching out Hal McRae for Mike Sweeney and making that rock.
Yeah, what struck me just most about this was just how similar they were in terms of their offensive
I agree.
performance. They're different eras, different positions. Obviously different context. A perennial winner versus Mike Sweeney being blamed because he had the misfortune of being on a team that sucked and it wasn't his fault, and he took a lot of flack for that. But they're very similar overall talents.
And my thought with Sweeney was that, okay, he did have the injuries when he was at his best. I mean, there's a reason why they signed him to what they signed him to. When he was at his best, I thought he was just going to blow Hal McRae away, and I was very happy because I'm a huge Hal McRae fan. I was very happy to see that Hal hung with him like that. That was an eye opener. I thought, okay, this is perfect. Then, if I have Hal on my bench, I've got my insurance for Mike. I can have Mike over there at first base for John Mayberry. Go ahead and DH Hal McRae when we got a lefty pitcher out there. So to me, I thought, giving you a little hint on the start of my bench, I thought it all worked really well. As far as building a real team by having Howe on there. So I know you're going to, you've got Sweeney on there as well. So we're of the same mindset of what we're kind of doing that first base DH.
So before we get to the bench, because I think that's what's going to be really interesting, our philosophies there. Do you have a 15 hitters on your team?
Yes, I have six bench.
So 6 bench guys. We mentioned obviously the platoon catcher. So Salvador Perez or El Porto, that's one guy. And then I have Mike Sweeney on the bench if Mayberry's starting. You have McRae, basically.
Right.
So that's that's 2 guys. So
we have 4 guys that we're going to finish off
with. Yes, 4 guys.
And we're one different. I have Lorenzo Cain in right field. You have
starter, right? That's one. And actually, spoiler, ultimately the hardest decision I had to make. I did not put Lorenzo Cain on my team.
Lorenzo Cain would not have made the team if I didn't start him. And so if maybe if I'd called you or texted you one more time and said, can I take a guy who didn't play at the spot and put him there? I would have Amos Otis, but I really wanted to find a guy who had actually played significant games at right field.
It makes perfect sense. I'm hoping that we have a spring training and that he'll learn, but yes, that there is a risk involved there.
And let's be clear, it makes my team better because of that, because I actually adhered to some. I didn't go to fantasy land. So I really wanted to do that. So that's why. But I am with you. Had Lorenzo Cain had I not landed on him for my right field, he would not have made the team. Because I am going to say also he could play a very good center field. The wall was a problem for him. He could run a long way and have it go off the heel of his glove. I know the numbers were fantastic for when he played. He just simply, Carlos Beltran was definitively better. That's not Lorenzo Cain was bad. He wasn't. He was outstanding. Beltran was better. From what all the people I talked to, Amos Otis was better. You mentioned the metrics not really living up to that, but that's what I've been told. But it was difficult. Cain makes the team because he's my starting right fielder. So, okay. So there's where we're different. Now,
okay.
You want to reveal the whole bench, or what do you want to do?
So I'm going to reveal, like, to me, my first bench guy, the most obvious guy, basically. And I think it's a guy who is already underrated, was probably underrated while he was a Royal, and that's Whit Merrifield. I have Whit Merrifield for one thing, Whit Merrifield, I think, got to 16 or 17 WAR as a member of the Kansas City Royals. He's like top 25 all time among hitters. And he really fits, the bench, the bench situation very well. He's my backup second baseman because, again, I'm going to be pinch hitting for Frank White a lot. He could play the outfield in a pinch. I don't feel like I'm going to have much need for him out there with his team, but Carlos Beltran might not play every day, and if Amos Otis gets hurt, although Otis and Wilson were pretty durable. But yeah, he can play the outfield. He can pinch run for my catchers, because I got Wilson in the starting lineup. And I got Beltran in the starting lineup. So I need a guy off the bench, and he's a very fast guy off the bench, and was a really underrated hitter. I mean, we forget, as a member of the Royals, he not only led the league in steals 3 times, which is still incredible. He led the league in hits twice. He led the league in doubles once. He led the league in triples once. He was a good player for a solid 5 years, 5.5 years, before his final season. It didn't end well with him on multiple levels, but he was, you know, he was been the best player of the post World Championship Royals,
That's
and
not saying
he
much. I
fits.
wouldn't even add that
I
doesn't
agree,
help
but
defend him. I,
but
I,
he
how,
fits this team well.
how much did you use the? Did you look at all at the WAR numbers and
I
how
mean,
much
I
that
use
time?
it as a sort of certainly as a guide, as a screening tool to make sure I'm not forgetting somebody. And it struck me as that when you look at like just second base, I mean, Frank White is clearly the number one second baseman in Royals history, but Whit Merrifield's almost certainly second,
Yeah,
and that stands for something. But needing a backup, the one thing that hurts him on this roster is that he doesn't really play shortstop. You want to have a guy who's a backup shortstop, and we'll get to the last guy on my roster soon enough. But I really feel, I mean, Merrifield was a better hitter than Frank White. That's just the reality of it. So if I'm losing late in a game and I need a bat, I'm willing to take my chance with Whit.
I know that you. I think putting Whit Merrifield on your bench is why Amos Otis is in right field. Am I right?
I'm not sure they're connected because I thought about Lorenzo Cain out there.
That's where I was, right?
Okay.
Like I was like, if I went with Amos Otis and right, Lorenzo Cain doesn't make the team and Whit Merrifield does. But because I went with Lorenzo Cain and right, I wanted two pure outfielders on the bench. And
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
and so Whit got bumped because of that. I have no problem. Whit was my toughest cut. You said
Okay.
Lorenzo Cain was yours. Whit Merrifield was my toughest
Okay,
cut.
and it does kind of fit because that Merrifield can play the outfield. Because you're right. I only have one really backup outfielder on this team,
Okay.
not counting Witt, and he does definitely provides that extra layer of protection.
And so for me, that was the hardest thing was because I actually started this when I was going through it in my head before I actually started writing it down. I was thinking, well, I start with Whit Merrifield on the bench. That's where it begins. And when I got down there, there were other things. I'm like, when I started putting the team together, who was going to play short? Also, I wanted a guy who could really go play short. And that's what bumped him. That and the fact that I put Lorenzo Cain at right. The Whit Merrifield part was the roster construction, and it gave me a little bit of insight into why he would have sat down in the minors all the time. Like if you're building your team, and you're saying, well, we need a guy who can really go get it in the outfield. Well, Whit can play out there. Well, we need a guy who can really handle the middle infield, and we'd like him to have shortstop ability. Well, Whit can play over there. It really actually gave me some insight into why it took so long for him to get to the big leagues. Because as I put this together, he kept getting bumped because I felt like I needed better at that spot. You chose the flexibility. I have no problem with it. But yeah, Whit was my toughest cut.
I mean, it sounds like again we're very similar, and we both just landed on one different player. But I think the thought process is very similar.
Okay.
All right. So who do you want to go to next? Who's another bench player you got?
So I'll go with a guy that do I have anyone else that's been mentioned that we don't need to? I'll just scrub. Amos Otis is on my bench, right?
Okay.
For all the reasons, that's an easy one. He's the best outfielder that's not out there. And to your point, maybe his career is definitely better than Lorenzo Cain's. He could go play right in a pinch, but the way I set it up, I have Amos Otis on the bench. That
Okay.
was
So
easy.
he's basically I have Merrifield, you have Amos Otis.
Yeah.
That's okay. So then where do you have next then?
Well, we've already so you want one of the other three that I have?
Yeah, there's three players left you haven't mentioned.
Okay. I'll go with what I think is the most obvious. I'll leave my two I think that are kind of crafty. The most obvious is Alex Gordon.
Okay.
I have Alex Gordon. I want great defense. I can push him up into third base if I need to, if George is hurt.
That's part of it too. He was actually the last guy it went back and forth between him and Lorenzo Cain, and ultimately there were two reasons I picked Gordon. But one of them was, like you said, I don't really want a backup third baseman, but George does get hurt from time to time, so having Gordon just slide over to third base is a nice feature.
And I liked it because I could play him in right. He makes it because Lorenzo Cain is only going to end up playing 100 games out there because he didn't meet our 7-year marker. So I'm like, okay, I need somebody who can do it. And that's where I'm cheating a little bit, but I'm not having him start out there. So that's why that's why I justify it. I spent many a night, many a midday and, discussing why wasn't Alex Gordon playing right field. He had the arm. He seemed like he could do it. My assumption is he could have done it. I don't see, to me, the corner, I know it slices a different way, but you either can read the slice or you can't. He could. I actually set out thinking he wasn't going to make it. I actually believe Alex Gordon to be one. Now, everybody take this the right way. One of the more overrated players in Royals history. There are people that act like, he's right there with some guys. He was very good. He was very good and was certainly at the heart of that championship team, the work ethic, all those things. I do love the flexibility. I do wonder a little bit, why didn't he play right? There were times that they really needed him to play right. You could have found a better bat, in left than you could that could play right. And so that always puzzled me. I'll always wonder what that was. I always wonder why he was shoved off third. But I also love the fact that he could play first as well. He actually played first, and I had a number of people tell me his best position was first base.
We'll get to that. I have some fun. I have a fun one there too.
Okay. So I got him. I put him on, and I feel really good. I think I've got a rock solid team, and really he's my platoon with Lorenzo Cain in right. And that's, again, I wanted a right fielder up front, but then I kind of fudged it a little bit by having.
I thought about, like, when I was trying to figure out the right field conundrum. That's really what we're dealing with here. I actually thought about, instead of moving Amos Otis there, do I put Alex Gordon right? Because, like you said, he had the skill set for it. He had a great arm. He could have done it. But ultimately, I just look at the track record of Amos Otis as an elite hitter, offensive player, counting his speed for 10 years versus Gordon, who was up and down, had a 5-year stretch where he was excellent, but the rest of it was hit or miss. But I also felt like he's a good bench player for one other reason, which is the Royals, when you put this lineup together, certainly when you have Mayberry and Darryl Porter in the starting lineup, I don't have any left-handed bats bats on the bench. The Royals, when you look at their history, almost all their best remaining players are right-handed. So Alex Gordon is actually the only left-handed hitter on my bench. If by wins above replacement, if the next guy on the list who didn't make my team, I think was like David DeJesus.
I gave a lot of thought to David DeJesus. Maybe we're going to hear his name. Maybe we're not. We're not, because I've already given.
All right. I was going to say, I mean, that's close. That's why Alex Gordon had to make this team, because I'm like, I'm not, I can defend Alex Gordon on an all-time Royals team. I'm not sure I could defend David DeJesus, who I loved and was an underrated player.
Yes.
Or Johnny Damon, who might have if he had stuck around longer, but and I don't feel like those guys make much sense as a bench player. Alex can come off the bench as a hitter. He can play defense for sure in left field. He can back up at third base. There are times where I would start him over Willie Wilson. If you're in a bandbox of a park, let's also consider, you're playing 81 games in Kansas City. Willie Wilson's starting at Kauffman Stadium. I know, especially if we're using the old Royal Stadium dimensions and the artificial turf. But even if you're not, it's a big stadium. He starts at home. On the road, you're playing at Yankee Stadium. I might start Alex Gordon at Yankee Stadium, where you just poke the ball out to right field. That's a home run. So he has some value there. Okay, so I'll do my next player, and on that subject. Sorry, we have two left. So I'll do the next one. You do the last one if you want. Okay. So my next player is I needed another left-handed bat, or at least a bat that wasn't right-handed, and I wanted a guy who was more of an on-base threat to go with the power. So I picked Jose Offerman, and I'll get you laughing there.
I looked at him, and I'm like,
Jose Offerman has the highest on-base percentage in Royals history for someone with, I believe, 1,000 or more plate appearances. He's a switch hitter. And one other thing, he played, the Royals got him. Remember, he had been a kind of a catastrophe as a defensive shortstop for the Dodgers. And it was actually one of the smarter things the Royals did was look at this guy who was just a total failure at shortstop, and said to themselves, you know what, let's get him off of the position that he clearly cannot play, move him to an easier defensive position, and maybe his bat will come alive. And that's sort of what happened. They moved him to second base. And he played a lot of second base for the Royals and was a decent defender at second base. But what he really showed was he actually played a lot of first base, especially his first year. And he was an absolute revelation defensively. I mean, the story of that team in 96 and 97 was, first base, if you take a shortstop, even a bad defensive shortstop, and move him to first base, yeah, he's probably going to have quite a bit of range over there. And Jose Offerman could pick it at first base. And so on this team where I've got John Mayberry and Mike Sweeney as my first baseman, and neither one is great defensively. If I got a late inning lead, I'm putting Jose Offerman at first base. He can be a defensive replacement as well as being the guy who pinch hits for Frank White and
I like
Fred
it.
Patek when they're down 3. Like if I need, if I'm down a run, I need a home run. Maybe I'll go to Gordon off the bench or Sweeney or whatever. But if I'm down multiple runs, I need to start a rally. I don't want Frank White's 283 whatever OBP up
Yeah.
in the 8th or 9th inning. I'm going to Jose Offerman, and he can stay in at second base or he can play first base if you got a lead. So he does a few things for my team.
I love it. I love it, and I'm jealous. I'm jealous. I wish I'd have thought about the defense at first base because I did a little bit. I'll go with my guy.
Yeah, I'm very curious now to hear who your guy is.
Because Brett can go over there. I actually didn't even look up his defense at first to maybe get your thoughts on it. I could look it up here quick. Maybe you've seen it before. I went with Kevin Seitzer.
I was going to say that's the other way you could have gone, and that's a great pick too. I mean, he's a very similar player from just an on base percentage standpoint, and yeah, it's a good question. I mean, he played first base late in his career, Seitzer, so it's hard to know. Like, would he have been a better defender? I assume he would have been fine there early in his career, or like you said, you just moved Brett over to first base. There are things you could do there. To me, honestly, the main reason was I just needed another bat on my bench that wasn't right-handed. I had too many right-handers on the bench.
And I'm right heavy. There's no doubt. I have when it's all said and done. I mean, I'll tip my hand a little bit maybe on my last one, but I've only got 4 left-handed bats and 2 switch hitters, and so I'm righty heavy. There's
I think I'm 4
and I kept looking, and I don't know why. I will tell you that I quickly went by Jose Offerman, but I had no idea those defensive numbers. I didn't even look. I'm like, that guy was a train wreck with the Dodgers. So I'm not getting any defense out of the guy. And, so I went right by him. I
just remember the delight at watching him at first base. He was, I don't remember if you remember him defensively.
Well, when he was playing, I was living in Vegas. And there was no MLB extra innings.
Okay.
So his years with the Royals coincided with my 3 years in Las Vegas.
It was his range on like ground balls down the line. It's like, oh wow, this guy, he didn't have the classic like power profile of a first baseman, but like
right.
He could get on base and he was playing like shockingly good defense for a guy who was just like laughed out of LA because he couldn't play shortstop.
Yeah.
But Seitzer makes complete sense, and I actually have a feeling we both have the same 15th guy on the roster because
neither one of us have had a shortstop, right?
Right. We both need a shortstop, and like you, I wanted a guy who could pick it.
And let me before you go further, I'll say if this leads you down that road, I also don't really have a backup second baseman yet.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I have Merrifield, yes.
And again, noticing how, although Hal McRae did play second base early in his career and did actually in some like 15th innings where we pinch hit a guy, he grabbed a mitt and went back out to second base. So I did think about that, okay, he's not going to move around well with the bum knee, but he is, he's not going to, it's not a foreign spot for him. But I remember as a kid watching him like the 14th or 15th inning have to go in at second base. And so I had that in the back of my mind, but I needed a backup shortstop and I wanted a guy who had played second base was really what I was looking. Otherwise I was going to have to go find Jay Bell. And, again, I am kicking myself. I wouldn't have Jose Offerman. I would have had to have constructed it differently. I probably wouldn't have had Kevin Seitzer if I had Offerman. And I don't mind having Seitzer because, by the way, Kevin Seitzer had a 375 on base percentage for his career. He was the last guy to walk 100 times in a Royals uniform. Still, to this day, that's a fact. He can flat out hit. He can flat out get on base. And he can play third and first as he proved over the course of his career. So, so your last guy is, I think you're up on this one. Right?
I think it's the same guy. The second base thing didn't matter as much to me because I had Merrifield and Offerman, but this is a guy who, again, if I'm pinch hitting for Fred Patek late in the game and I need to bring in a shortstop, I want a guy who can absolutely play defense.
Okay.
And maybe the most underrated defensive shortstop, if not defensive player in Royals history, short career, Ray Sanchez.
Yep.
Ray Sanchez, we agree. 3 years in the Royals, in the Royals organization, and we didn't have defensive metrics at that time. I just remember him watching him, and he was, the word everyone would use is he's so smooth. He didn't have like ridiculous range, He didn't have a crazy arm, but he got to everything. He made it look easy. He set his feet. He threw the ball. So you knew at the time, oh, this is a really good defense. He wasn't much of a hitter, but he was a really good defensive shortstop. Now we have metrics. In those 3 years, he was plus 22, plus 22, plus 19. That is insane. That is absolutely like not just Gold Glove caliber. That's almost Andrelton Simmons at his prime. That's like practically Ozzie Smith territory. He was never that good before or after. The Royals got him at the peak of his, defensive talent. And maybe there was, those numbers are a little bit exaggerated, but he was an exceptional defensive shortstop. Could he hit? Not really. He could hit an empty 280, in
Yeah.
an era which was a high offense era. So, but you could bunt and you could probably do some funny
He
things
could
with
bunt.
you could a suicide squeeze with him and with Willie Wilson on third base. That would be a lot of fun. There are some things you could definitely do with this, with the talents you've got on this team. But the guy could play defense.
But 25 more points of on base than Frank White. Basically, 321 was his on base.
So much of that is the context of the year. The 2001, whatever baseball versus 1980 baseball, 1972 baseball, or whatever. Frank White, that's 25 points of on base right there. So
Yeah.
he was not a good hitter, but
No,
he wasn't terrible.
But I'm just saying he was 289 and 321, and I get it that the years are different, but I still think that he did handle the bat well. They batted him second, which is preposterous based upon what we know today. But in the old school, screwed up mindset of I got my guy who gets on and I want to get him over, and he did some of that stuff. 2 things real quick about Ray Sanchez. One, I remember talking to him and talking with Frank. Was it Frank I was talking to? Because he was coaching the team then. I said, well, so-and-so, and he is, this guy's considered better and all that. He said, Ray Sanchez is better than him. Ray Sanchez is better than him. I remember talking to Allard Baird. Ray Sanchez is better than him. When they first got him, he's like, he's better than that guy. He's better than that guy. Which, by the way, another reason why Allard Baird's tenure is underrated here. You don't have to say he's great, but there are a lot of things like finding Ray Sanchez that were really good moves, putting together the bats, the lineup, and making sure he had that. They just never, shockingly, the organization couldn't get the pitching right. But I was told by Frank and by Allard Baird, yeah, so-and-so lays out and dives for a ball and comes up firing. And so you get all this hype around, look how great he is. Ray is already taking a step before the ball's hit. He's positioned better. He comes up with it. He fields it cleanly, and he makes the throw. That's to your point, the smoothness thing.
And the numbers bear that out. Like I give them all the credit that they were absolutely right at a time where we didn't have a way of really measuring that.
Yeah. And then the other thing I always remember about Ray Sanchez is I remember sitting in the dugout and Johnny Damon was coming back from the cages and he was in it for the stolen base crown. I think he ended up winning it. They're like, hey, so-and-so had this or that. And, it's going to be close. And it was coming down. They weren't going to make the playoffs, obviously. And, that was one of the things everyone was watching was would he win the stolen base crown? And he goes, well, I'd probably be up by 20 if Ray didn't swing it every time I'm already got the bag stolen and foul one off, and kind of laughed and went down the dugout. But Ray Sanchez did swing too much. And there were times Damon had the base stolen. Yeah. And he was swinging. It was just so funny how Damon said that with kind of the wry, shy smile. He was a much shyer guy back then, kind of smiled and then scurried off up the tunnel and everything. But you could tell he'd been pissed off more than a few times on when he had a bag stolen easy and Ray Sanchez swung over it. So, all right, that does it. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good
So let's why don't we finish just with a quick lineup, like the order that we've got guys in. So just to recap, we have very similar rosters. You left. I left Lorenzo Cain off because I have Amos Otis in right field. You left Whit Merrifield off because you have Lorenzo Cain in right field.
Right.
And then I have Offerman. You have Seitzer.
Right.
And that's basically that's the gist of it. So my lineup, I actually, because again we have the two righties at the bottom. I originally had Amos Otis leading off, and then it was going to be 3 in a row or 9-1, 8-9-1. So I actually put Beltran in the leadoff spot.
Okay.
Because he's a switch hitter. Then Brett, Al McRae, who's right-handed, John Mayberry, lefty, Amos Otis, right-handed, Darrell Porter, lefty, and then Willie Wilson batting seventh as a switch hitter before White and Potek. And specifically with Wilson, I love having the guy who is such an elite base runner, but maybe a lower OBP in the seventh spot because the thing about Willie is, so much of baseball history is you want your fastest guy leading off because then he's in front of the guys who are the best hitters. Yeah, but the best hitters they can drive him in from first base. Like I don't care, Willie Wilson on second base for George Brett versus first base. Yeah, it's nice, but George hits the ball over the wall. He's going to hit Almond going to hit a double. Like I don't need that guy to steal base. And the value of getting caught stealing, the downside is so much greater when you make it out right in front of your best hitters. So I actually love having the really fast guy towards the bottom of the lineup in front of the worst hitters. Because, Freddie Patek is not hitting a home run, but he might hit a single. And if I can get Willie Wilson over to second base, he can steal second base or maybe even like you get to third and then score on a ground out. That's the value of having him there. So, and then the value there is I have the two righties at the bottom, but otherwise it goes switch left, right, left, switch. So I don't have two lefties in a row anywhere. And there's, much harder to pitch around that lineup.
My lineup was Willie Wilson leading off. In his prime, he was hanging 340 somethings because he was batting 330s, 350 somethings. I think he even had did he have a 360 something one year? But we're talking about getting him on base and creating havoc. George Brett is batting second. Mike Sweeney is batting third. High average, good power, all that. John Mayberry is fourth. Carlos Beltran is five. Because I won his on base. So I've got lots of on base up there at the top. I've gone switch, left, switch. And then right with Salvador Perez because I'm playing him the bulk of the time because Porter wasn't on the team 6 years. So then righty. So I'm very happy with my 1 through 6. I've got 3 righties in a row. Really 4 in a row from Salvador Perez. But I've got 3 righties after a righty, which I don't love. And I tried to find another way, but I said, well, we're going to play it this way. And actually, Alex Gordon's going to play a lot. He would be batting 7th there, which would give me a left. But I've got Lorenzo Cain at 7 for the same reason you do. I want the speed there. Just kind of start that back over. Frank White at 8. Can't put him higher. Don't want to put him higher because of the lack of on base. Want the speed of Freddie Patek at 9 in front of the speed of Willie Wilson. And frankly, Brett in his prime, the speed of Brett, too, who stole 200 bases and hit 100 triples in his career. I was more athletic, so I had Freddie Patek at 9. So I go switch left, switch right, left, right platoon, really basically right. So yeah, I'll take it.
It's similar. I mean, mine's better, of course, but they're similar. So.
And mine's actually lived to the spirit of the rules. Right, I didn't cheat.
If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying, Soren.
I didn't move a position, but I will say I do feel bested in your knowledge of Jose Offerman. But in my defense, it was 3 years ago. I lived in Vegas when he was here, so I followed him. I followed everybody. I was working on a national network, so I followed all the teams. But I will admit that that's not my sharpest. That's my blind spot.
I'm glad that I got one on you at least. Yeah, that's such a rare thing here.
So. I don't know that you got one on. Well, you got one on me in the sense that I didn't consider him. Yes, had I considered him, I don't know if I will say no. I wouldn't take him. Now I can't.
No, never.
But I really didn't consider. I looked at him. I considered for that, but I didn't actually even open the page. I just went crap defender, and so I did not know that part of it. So yes, I will defer to you on that. All right, don't forget we are brought to you by our great friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete. Gann Asphalt and Concrete proudly serving the entire Kansas City metro area. Gann Asphalt and Concrete is Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project, written warranty comes with it. You can find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Again, that's GannAsphalt.com to see him today. We will be back at it next week. We will break down the all-time pitching staffs. Can't wait to do that. That was a lot of fun as well. We'll see how Rany cheated on that one. And then we'll see who I forgot. We'll see who I forgot as well. So for the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, my name is Soren Petro, saying thank you very much for joining us here on